Incumbent comfort. Congressman Steve King seeking a U.S. House of Representatives 7th term. Watching as 2 other Iowa congressional districts choose candidates for open seats. Congressman King's perspective on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation.
Iowa banks know you want honest advice about how to best reach your financial goals, whether it's financing and education, buying a new home, growing a business, or funding retirement. Iowa Banks, Iowa Values. MyIowaBank.com.
The Rotary Clubs of Iowa and Rotary International.
In 1985, Rotary International committed to a goal of ending polio worldwide. Very soon now, after immunizing over 2 billion children, the goal will be achieved. Rotary, humanity in motion.
Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. The Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure. Iowa Communications Network. The ICN is committed to the enhancements of distance learning and continues to meet the demands for greater access of high-speed internet by educational users. For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, June 6th edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
Republican Steve King carries the title incumbent now, but as a first-time candidate back in 2002, running for the Republican nomination in an open seat election, he had to sweat out a nominating convention to edge out other candidates seeking the party's nomination. After securing that Republican nomination that year, he's gone on to handily now win 6 congressional elections. Congressman King, welcome back to Iowa Press. And I said as a first-time candidate, actually you'd been in the Iowa legislature, but you were running for Congress that time, back in 2002.
And it was quite an experience, Dean.
Yes, we're going to be talking about that. Across the table, James Lynch, who writes for the Gazette, published in Cedar Rapids, and Radio Iowa News Director Kay Henderson.
Iowa Republicans will be having a nominating convention in the current 3rd district. Back in 2002 in the old 5th. Let's go back to primary election night. You didn't quite cross the 30% threshold. What happened that night? Had you already been planning for a district nominating convention?
Well, Kay, I reflected upon this morning. I reviewed some of the documents to refresh myself, and we had done some in preparation for the special nominating convention. You're so busy in a campaign, it's hard to run a dual effort. But we had identified all of the delegates. We'd done a profile on them. If I can use that word today, we would have used that then without any kind of concern. And we knew essentially where they lived. We had their contact information. We knew a lot of what they did for a living and something about their background. And then it happened that in our natural telemarketing effort, our outreach, that we had 121 of the 533 delegates that had already donated to my campaign. Not because we targeted them as delegates, but because of our outreach and the broader fundraising effort. So that foundation was in place, and then I remember watching the polls come in that Tuesday night of the election. We had hoped that we would get over the 35%. We thought we were going to win. We ended up with just technically 30.28% of the vote. Okay. And it was a victory celebration that was tempered by the realization that we had another campaign that started just as soon as the polls closed that Tuesday night.
Well, I have talked to people since who said you showed up at their house, that you called them on the phone.
These are potential delegates.
These are potential delegates at that convention. You met them for coffee. I mean, how intensely did you seek that nomination?
Oh, I think we worked it pretty hard after the election. I just remember we had a campaign meeting the next day, so it was on Wednesday, and some of that strategy, some of my campaign team had already put in place. They had scheduled for me to call delegates, and the delegates on the schedule were those who had either donated to the campaign or we thought had already committed. And I realized after a few phone calls that those supporters want to talk, and they'll want to talk a long time, and I'm like that myself. And so it wasn't going to be very good to focus on that. So I I said to my staff, why don't you make the phone calls to these 121, and then we will solidify their support. If I need to talk to them, I will. Meanwhile, we need to go see these people because, once your phone rings 6 or 8 times a day, you get a little phone shy. So we went, Marilyn and I just joked about it, ambushing delegates is how we phrased it.
But you had to keep on it, though, because you had other candidates doing the same thing as you were doing. They could lure people away from you who said they were supporting you, and all of a sudden they weren't.
So we had our campaign staff was solidifying those votes and holding them down, and then I'd circle back to anybody they had doubt about. Meanwhile, I remember Marilyn and I, the first morning after, so that I'm going to say was the Thursday morning after the election, we would leave early in the dark and try to be where we were going to start when people started getting up. And we went down to Silver City in Mills County, and to Linda Thomas's house, a delegate. And pretty soon she just lit up and she said, let me call some more delegates in. I didn't realize Silver City was the political epicenter of Mills County. But when we left that day, there were 10 delegates behind us that hadn't been before. It was a great start, and it gave us energy, and we used that same tactic all the way through until the convention.
You've touched on this, Congressman, but how do the candidates now have about 2 weeks to win over? They need, I think it's like 256, 257 delegates to actually get the nomination. Mm-hmm. How does that change from a primary election campaign where you're kind of taking a scattergun approach to winning over votes?
Well, you're talking to a small universe of people that are scattered over all of the counties, and they are activists. They know what they believe. Some of them have already pledged, and some of them are already dug in. So if I were one of these candidates, I would have already had those background work done. I would have them analyzed, and I'd be looking at the probabilities and decide where you can put your effort. But, yes, go see them. And they're probably going to wish I hadn't said this, but I think you have to go see them because you can't make a sale over a telephone or something this important. And to the delegates, this is the most important thing that they're going to probably have the chance to do as being active in politics. Their vote is going to count more on that special nominating convention than probably any other time in their life. So they will show up, they will vote, and if you're going to make the sale, you need to do it by looking them in the eye.
If a candidate hasn't started that process even before Tuesday night, is it too late?
No, well, it's you don't know. Each candidate might be in a different position as far as how many delegates would be supportive if they had the convention election night. Now that shifts, and the candidates are going to be thinking, one, they'll be looking at who came out on top, who won. I know I made the argument that I won the election, I just hadn't won yet the nomination, so I asked the voters to ratify the decision of the primary voters. That was my argument. And others would say, well, King can't win a general election, so we don't want to nominate him even though he was the highest vote getter. There will be all kinds of arguments that will be made, and each one has a different outreach effort and different geographical reach too. So I'd say they need to plan an individual strategy for themselves.
How damaging is the time that you're spending on that when you could have had the nomination, been out fundraising and campaigning?
Well, I didn't look at it, Dean, like it damaged us or took away our opportunity to campaign for the general election because there were that 3-week period of time or so, a little bit longer, I think, and the intensity was so high that the press was behind us anyway. We got a lot of earned media, people were paying attention, and so I think that was a plus from that standpoint. This short period of time between now and this special nominating convention, I think will bring the spotlight on Republicans rather than have it turn equally to Democrats.
The day of the convention, each candidate gives a speech. Your main challenger in that event, which I covered, was Brent Segrist, who was the former House Speaker. He's from Council Bluffs. How close was it?
It was too close. We went through the maximum number of ballots, 3 ballots, and let's see, the order in the primary election was myself, and then right at near 24% was John Redwine was actually second, and Brent Segrist was a very, very close third, and then Jeff Ballinger was in at about 20%. And so on the first ballot, John Redwine got 99 votes, and he dropped off. I had no idea that he was going to endorse me, but he asked me to go back in his green room, and he said, I want to endorse you. Would that be okay? Well, yes, who would turn that down? He is a great friend still today and was on that day. And then we went through the second ballot where Jeff Ballinger dropped off and endorsed Segrist. And so we came down to that final ballot, and some of the things happened you wouldn't have expected. For example, some of the delegates from a single county, which I won't name on the program, went home thinking it was over. and the alternates were seated then, and they cast entirely different ballots than the delegates would have. And when that vote went up on the board, there were only 19 votes different. Brent Segrist and I, who is a good friend today too, and he's conducted himself honorably all the way through this, we were standing side by side at the podium at the convention, and when the votes went up on the board and it was clear that I had won, he leaned over to me and he said, "I made you sweat." And I leaned back and I said, "No rematch." And so I don't want to go through that again. But it's as high a test of thing as you can do in politics.
The other rule that Republicans have is that you don't have to have your name on the primary ballot to be a candidate at this convention. Have you heard that anyone else who wasn't one of those 6 candidates is putting their name forward?
I've not heard any other name that's likely. I know there's been discussion about that possibility, but I think that the candidates that have campaigned so long and so hard, and by the way, they're honorable, every one of them, and I could work with every one of them. They have earned this, and I think the delegates are going to respect their effort, and it's unlikely that anyone else would be nominated, although the rules allow for it.
Congressman, having been through this process, do you think it should be changed? Is it the best way to pick the nominee if the primary election doesn't nominate someone? Should that 35% rule or state law be dropped and just the winner on primary night is the winner?
I may want to wait until after the convention to put a final word on that, but if you'd asked me last year, I would have said, here's what we need to do. The 35% number is fine because it makes sure that you nominate someone who's a fairly strong candidate. But I would rather go to a runoff rather than a special nominating convention.
The top 2.
Yes, an automatic runoff that's set in a short period of time, say 2 weeks, and get it over with. The conventions leave themselves open to a lot of different things. First of all, if you finished first in the primary, then it's like a game of King of the Hill. Everybody is trying to pull you off of that, and they look at what kind of deals they can make. If I lose, I'll support so-and-so. Those kind of things, and the longer it goes, the more opportunity there is for that. Now, I don't think there was a lot going on in the convention I went through, and I don't anticipate it here, but the rules allow for too many things that make me a little nervous.
I want to switch to another kind of negotiation, very high-level international negotiation that we've just have witnessed. Did the United States pay a fair price for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl's freedom from the Taliban?
In my opinion, Dean, no.
What would have been a fair price? Would you have exchanged it all? Why you're saying no?
Our U.S. policy has long been that we don't negotiate with terrorists.
There's where you're coming down.
Yes, and I put out a message here, I think it was Monday of this week, that I made it clear my position. But those 5 top Taliban/Al-Qaeda officials, and by the way, everybody in Gitmo has an Al-Qaeda affiliation. We see them as Al-Qaeda detainees there. But, excuse me, these were the top 5 of the top officials. And to hand them over for someone who walked off the base, and I don't think that's in question any longer, he walked off the base, now the legal definition of that's probably open yet, empowers our enemies, and it discourages our troops themselves, and it puts them at risk. I met a father this morning whose son is deployed over there now. And for him to maintain his composure while he just told me the scenario that his son is in today, that tells you how they think about it. And so, no, I think it was a colossal mistake on the part of this administration to make such a deal. There had to be a better way to get him back. I'd have rather sent commando troops in there to bring him back, given the record that we thought he had before this emerged.
So what should the congressional action or reaction be, other than rhetoric?
Well, the president violated a law he signed, again. And I think there's a new list growing here. It's the laws he's refused to honor, refused to enforce, or in fact violated, that are replete. The list now is 75 and perhaps more than that, many of them with Obamacare, but the new list is which laws has he refused to enforce or violated that he signed. This is a very critical circumstance that we're in, but we've got 2.5 years yet. We tried to shut off the funding to Obamacare. He shut the government down. A couple of dozen Republicans decided they needed to open the government back up. So now the president is more empowered by understanding, knowing that Congress cannot control him by the purse strings. The political scenario doesn't allow that to happen. There's a constitutional remedy that we know is not a remedy. So beyond that, public opinion needs to push back very hard. And to the extent that it can be a restraint, I'm looking for a president to come along in 2016 that will restore the soul of America.
Let us turn to the Veterans Administration and what's been going on there. Governor Terry Branstad, who's a Vietnam-era veteran, says Iowa facilities are doing a good job. Is that your judgment, and what should happen now in the system?
First, I'd comment that Governor Branstad still fits into his uniform, and that's a pretty good accomplishment after these years. I do think they're doing a good job here in Iowa. When I visited, I've been impressed with the standards that they had and the level of care that I could see and the response of the caregivers and those that were receiving that care. I think that Iowans bring an extra special character to this. And we have a deep, deep appreciation and reverence for our veterans. If anything emerges to the contrary, I will go there and visit myself. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I want to say these caregivers across the country, a lot of them fit the same category that I've described, but there's a corruption at the top that's got to be fixed. We tried to give that authority to the Secretary. That was blocked in the Senate. We're going to have to go back to Congress next week and give it another try.
These care centers and hospitals were created to deal with service-related injuries. And the VA is, the national expert in terms of some of the catastrophic injuries, loss of limbs that soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan are suffering. Should these centers be the stop for every kind of malady that a U.S. veteran has, or should it just be a service-related injury?
I think we need to take care of our veterans, and whatever the deal was when they signed up, that's the deal we need to commit to and keep. If that deal is for a lifetime, it's for a lifetime. I have long suggested and continue to support the idea of handing a plastic card to our veterans that says you can use this to acquire health care under the rules of the Veterans Administration anywhere in America. And that's the kind of solution we need to bring to bear here. That would provide competition, and the argument that you've just made that I've often heard from the Veterans Administration is we take care of those maladies and we are better at that than anyone else. The veterans themselves could decide that if they have a card, and that's what I think we should do.
Speaking of cards, you've been an opponent of giving immigrants a card, a citizenship card, and you've kind of carved out a niche for yourself as the leading opponent of immigration reform. Why? Why are you so adamantly opposed to immigration reform as opposed to creating some sort of a pathway to citizenship for these people?
Well, in the first place, the immigration system is not broken. I hear that continually, that it's a broken system. It's not. It is the cumulative effect of going clear back to the 1986 Amnesty Act. And I remember that day. That was one of the 2 times that Ronald Reagan let me down, only 2. And it was a really frustrating day for me. I was in my construction office. I remember that day, and I thought, Ronald Reagan will understand what happens to the rule of law if he rewards people for breaking it. And, of course, he was convinced to sign the Amnesty Act. And we set about trying to restore the rule of law. The law was going to be enforced from that point forward, and so was the border. We got neither. But we got a lot of amnesty, 3 times what was expected. It was supposed to be 1 million, it became 3 million. And now that's built and grown, and each succeeding president has enforced the law essentially less. Now we're more than 11 million. I think by now everybody knows that. Is it more than 20 million is the question, not more than 11. And it's because of the magnet that's been here, because of our refusal to enforce the law. If you want to have a great country, you want to be a great country, and we are still a great country, there are a number of pillars of American exceptionalism that we must adhere to and restore and refurbish. Most of them are in the Bill of Rights, but also the rule of law is an essential pillar of American exceptionalism. If we reward people for breaking it, then we will not see the rule of law restored, at least with regard to immigration, within the lifetime of this republic. That's how important it is, and that's why I focus on it, James.
This is an issue that you and Speaker John Boehner have had words about. If the Republicans maintain the majority after this fall's election, will you vote for John Boehner as Speaker again?
I haven't made that decision, and we'd have to see if there are other candidates that might come forward. I think that if you look at the pattern of his behavior, you could understand why that would be a difficult decision for me.
Well, would you like to see another Speaker, someone else in that role?
There comes a time for fresh blood, and I know that dialogue is out there, and there's an open discussion about who that might be. I'd be looking at anyone that might present themselves and want to pick the best candidate to be the next Speaker.
Would you present yourself?
No.
Why?
It's not my style, Kay. It's just the straight answer is once you get into leadership, you have to build that coalition, and you have to get some from the right and some from the left, and or you can go all the way, I guess, in one way or the other. But in the end, it's not your position. It's the coalition of the 218 votes. And I learned in the Iowa Senate that wasn't my role. My role was to be the conscience of the conservatives, the constitutional principled conservatives. That's my role in Congress today, too. And by the way, as I read the clippings from the special convention 12 years ago, that's what I said at the convention in my acceptance speech. I will use this seat to move the political center to the right. And I think I've kept my word.
Well,
not far enough, but we're working at it.
What I really hear you saying is that you admit that you're polarizing and you're not a consensus builder.
Now, Dean, that might be a bit of a logical leap here. No, I don't think so. In fact, you might think that if you hadn't looked at the votes last week when Chuck Schumer has 4 times now publicly come out and called me names and said, let's see, xenophobe is the one where I guess I'm supposed to be afraid of him. I'm not. I think he should debate me on the topic. But he says King wants to do nothing. Well, I'm the only one that's actually brought immigration legislation in the last 2 years. 3 different pieces. They've all passed. They've all passed with bipartisan support and broad support in the Republican conference. So I think that record says not polarizing, although sometimes you have to take a strong position and stand on principle.
Okay.
You voted for passage of the Farm Bill in January. There are Republican candidates seeking office, Joni Ernst among them, who has said they would have voted against the Farm Bill. What's your advice to your fellow Republicans on this issue?
Well, we have a farm bill now, and it's we're implementing it now, and it's what we have. It's the law. So once you're working with the law, roll up your sleeves and do the best you can to bring it forward and get it implemented. And from where I sat, I spent 3 years on that. I knew the limitations, or at least I believed I knew the limitations on what we could accomplish in that farm bill. We got a lot of provisions written into the base bill early and fought hard for some things that should have been changed, but it's what we have. And we needed a good risk management program for our producers. We got that, and we should have treated livestock better. There's too much in the nutrition side of this bill. It would have been nice to have been able to, I'll say, I refused to sign the conference report. I was a conferee. I refused to sign it because we didn't have a legitimate conference. They shut out the debate and the negotiations on 3 amendments that should have been a subject of a vote. So I refused to sign it, but I voted for the bill on the floor because our producers need a policy, and that's the argument I'd make to those that would be opposed.
Congressman, next Saturday, June 14th, the state Republican Party will be having its convention, and one of the parts of that, of course, is writing a party platform. In the 1st Congressional District, delegates to that convention passed a resolution saying there should be no government role in marriage. That was the way they addressed the same-sex marriage issue. Is that a good way for the state party to address the issue, to just say there's no role for government in marriage?
Well, if you took all of the government involvement in marriage out, that would eliminate a lot of tax provisions, a lot of regulations, state and federal. I think that's a great big reach. What's really happened is that marriage came from the foundation of our Western Christendom faith, as Churchill would have described it. And then we set up civil marriage to mirror religious marriage. And policies that came forward that supported married couples were to encourage a man and a woman joined together, hopefully in holy matrimony, hopefully blessed with children, because that's the best nucleus to pass our values along to the next generation. That's why government got involved in the first place. I think to simply back away from it and eliminate any government involvement, that's a great big reach, and I'd be unlikely for something like that to survive, at least in the Republican convention. I don't know what the Democrats say. They probably already are there. They have other advocacies, don't they, for different relationships that Republicans may not be for.
Kate?
What sort of role do you have in your party? If someone were to say, have a dispute involving the Liberty wing and the establishment wing, you have in the past said you're sort of the bridge between those 2 wings. What is your role in the party?
Well, I think that I'm seen as, and I think legitimately seen as, a full-spectrum constitutional conservative. I'm naturally a fiscal and social conservative. It isn't that I've adapted to the political climate. It's that my convictions happen to, I arrived into the political arena with them. And I look at the establishment wing of the party, and I've long said to them, I think I give you everything you want, so why are you complaining if you get more than you want? And that would take care of that side of the party. The Liberty side of the party, or I might say Libertarian, but the Liberty side of the party has gotten stronger in the last couple of cycles. We need them in the Republican Party. We need people who are focused on the Constitution, who are focused on individual rights. And so if neither wing could be successful on their own, I argued that there's a natural symbiotic relationship between the establishment, the full spectrum constitutional conservatives, fiscal and social, and the Liberty wing of the party. It's natural for us to be bonded together, and however you put a party together, you're going to have people on each wing. It's just a matter of how broad it's going to be. So I'd encourage them, let's roll up our sleeves and do the best we can so that everybody gets as much as they believe in and legitimately deserve.
Congressman, we haven't talked much about it, but your name is going to be on the ballot this fall. You're running for re-election. You have an opponent, Jim Maurer. Are you going to debate him? In the past, you've said candidates need to earn the right to debate you, and has he earned that right?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of him yet. I have seen him once. But we did 7 debates last time with Christy Vilsack, and you know, I've been probably 8 or 10 years of criticism for not debating, so we did a lot of debates. And looking back over the clippings in that, I'm not seeing a lot of commentary about who came out on top in those debates, not dialogue in the public arena. So a lot of the people that have asked me if I would debate didn't seem to be willing to print or state an opinion as to the results of those debates. It's a little discouraging to walk out of there and see that the people in the room had a look, but beyond that, they didn't get much view of it. So at this point, I don't see necessarily the return for all of that time and investment, but I'm happy to look through the clippings and see how it was handled by the press.
What are your future plans? You're going for another term now, but what are you looking toward?
Dean, I have a longer-term plan, as you know, and
We're only 10 seconds here.
Okay. We have more to say about who will be the next president of the United States here in Iowa than anybody else on a per capita basis. I want to be engaged in that deeply. I want to facilitate access for the candidates to Iowans and vice versa. I want to tie Iowa to New Hampshire, to South Carolina, and Florida if we can, because if we can, out of Iowa, punch the right ticket and they make it to Florida, that's the next president. That's the future of our country.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean.
Next week on Iowa Press, State Senator Jack Hatch, now a Democratic candidate for governor, hoping to defeat incumbent Terry Branstad. The conversation with Jack Hatch, usual time, 7:30 Friday night, noon on Sunday. I'm Dean Borg, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation,
Iowa banks know you want honest advice about how to best reach your financial goals, whether it's financing and education, buying a new home, growing a business, or funding retirement. Iowa Banks, Iowa Values. MyIowaBank.com.
The Rotary Clubs of Iowa and Rotary International.
In 1985, Rotary International committed to a goal of ending polio worldwide. Very soon now, after immunizing over 2 billion children, the goal will be achieved. Rotary, humanity in motion.
Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. The Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure. Iowa Communications Network. The ICN supplies authorized users with dedicated internet and data connections to enhance their mission of protecting the citizens of Iowa with a private and secure statewide fiber optic network.